My daughter was 8 years old when she learned what the word homeless meant. Not from a book. Not from a news segment she wasn't supposed to be watching. From her grandmother. From my mother. Who said it to her face in a driveway with her arms crossed, while my daughter's backpack sat on the concrete beside her. I wasn't there when it happened. I found out 3 days later from my daughter, who told me in the same quiet, matter-of-fact voice she uses to tell me about lunch at school. Grandma said we don't have a house anymore. She looked at me and then looked back at her cereal. She stirred it once. Is that true? I said, no, baby. That's not true. And then I said something that, at the time, I meant as reassurance. I said, okay. What my mother didn't know, what none of them knew, was that okay is what I say when I have already started counting. Welcome back to Family Revenge Stories New, the channel where quiet people keep the receipts and family learns eventually that boundaries have a price. If you've ever watched someone mistake your silence for surrender, and you already know how that story ends, drop a comment and subscribe. You're in the right place. I am a forensic accountant. I have been one for 11 years. Before that, I was an auditor for a regional firm. Before that, I was the girl in every group project who made the spreadsheet nobody asked for and caught the math error nobody else noticed. Numbers for me are a first language. The thing about numbers is that they don't have feelings. They don't lie to make you feel better. They don't stay quiet to keep the peace. A number is a number. What happened is what happened. The ledger doesn't care how uncomfortable the balance makes you. My mother cares deeply about comfortable. She has constructed her entire life around it. I am the third of 4 children. My older brothers, Marcus and Derek, left for college and came back only for holidays and crises, which in our family were often the same event. My younger sister, Patrice, stayed local and became my mother's favorite in the way that youngest children sometimes do when the others scatter. Not because she was the most loved, but because she was the most available. I was the middle one who stayed close enough to be useful and far enough away to be blamed. My father, Leon, was different from all of us. He was slow-moving and warm in the way that rivers are warm, not dramatic about it, just consistently, quietly sustaining. He retired from the post office at 64. He had a garden in the backyard that he talked to, which sounds eccentric and was. He made my daughter laugh in the way that only grandfathers can, belly deep and uncomplicated. He died on a Tuesday in March, 14 months before this story ends. My mother did not grieve him so much as she pivoted. Within 6 weeks of his funeral, she had reorganized the house, donated his clothes, and begun making references to moving forward, in the tone of someone who has been practicing the phrase. I put my hands in my pockets during those conversations. I watched the thermostat readings on his old space heater, which I kept. I counted things. It is what I do. The house, their house, the house I grew up in, a 3-bedroom in a neighborhood that had quietly become desirable over the past decade, was paid off. My father had made sure of that. He had also, I would come to learn, made sure of several other things. But in those early weeks of grief, I did not yet know what he had made sure of, because I had not yet been invited to know. That invitation arrived, as most things do, on a Tuesday. It was my mother's birthday weekend. The last weekend of September. I remember because my daughter had just started 2nd grade and was going through a phase where she narrated everything she ate, and she had narrated an entire dinner about whether her pizza slice looked like a dinosaur. It was a normal weekend. We drove to my mother's house, which is 40 minutes from mine. I parked in the driveway and my daughter ran ahead, the way she always did. I was unbuckling my seatbelt when I heard my mother's voice from the porch. Whose car is that in the driveway? My daughter stopped on the steps. It's Mommy's car, Grandma. There was a pause. And then, she's still driving that thing? Not to my daughter. Just out loud. The way you complain about weather. I went inside. The house smelled like it always had, lemon polish and something frying, and my sister Patrice was already there, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of wine, which was unusual for 11 in the morning. She smiled at me with the warmth that I have since recalibrated. At the time it just looked like a smile. The birthday dinner was fine. My mother held court. Patrice laughed at everything. Marcus and Derek called on speakerphone and were enthusiastic in the way of people who are calling from a safe distance. My daughter sat beside me and ate carefully and told a story about her teacher that nobody listened to except me and my father's empty chair. I left at 7. The drive was quiet. I turned the heat on for my daughter and she fell asleep before we hit the highway. 3 days later, she told me what my mother had said. She said, "When you went to the bathroom, Grandma told me that you were going to have to move soon because the house we live in isn't ours anymore, and we'd probably be homeless." My hands were on the kitchen counter. I pressed my palms flat against the surface. "Cool Formica. Solid." She said that. She said you'd figure it out. She didn't sound mad. She just said it like it was true. I picked up my phone. I opened my notes app. I typed, September 29th. Mother told Ellie, my daughter's name is Ellie, that we would be homeless soon. Unprompted. At birthday dinner. In the kitchen while I was in the bathroom. Then I put the phone face down and made my daughter a snack, and asked her about her day. And she told me about the dinosaur-shaped eraser she had found on the playground. I sent her to her room at 8. I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad. I wrote down everything she had told me. I wrote down the exact words. I wrote down the approximate time what I could reconstruct. I drew a line at the bottom of the page. This was not yet about money. This was about my 8-year-old being handed a threat she didn't have the vocabulary to carry. Whoever put it in her hands would answer for it. That much I had already decided. The question was what exactly my mother thought she knew. The answer came 11 days later, in a conference room on the 14th floor of a downtown building. In a meeting I had been specifically invited to by my father's estate attorney, a man named Gerald Osei. Gerald had sent me a letter. Not an email. A letter on firm letterhead with a physical envelope. I had set it on my desk when it arrived and looked at it for a full minute before opening it. When I opened it, I read it twice. Then I took a photograph of every page with my phone. Then I put the original in my fireproof box. The letter asked me to come in at my earliest convenience regarding the estate of Leon Aubrey Whitfield, my father. It noted that there were documents requiring my signature and review, and that the appointment should be scheduled at your private discretion, as certain matters pertain specifically to you. My private discretion. I scheduled it for the following Tuesday. Gerald Osei was a careful man. He shook my hand and poured me water without asking and placed a folder on the table in front of me with the deliberate patience of someone who has delivered news in conference rooms for a long time and understands that the delivery matters. He said, "Your father updated his estate documents approximately 14 months before his death. The will you may have been aware of, the one he executed in 2009, was superseded. Entirely." He slid the folder toward me. I opened it. My father's will, dated March 11th of the year before he died, named me as sole beneficiary of the house. The family home. 3 bedrooms paid off in a neighborhood where houses now sold in the high 300s. Not split among 4 children. Not held in trust for my mother's lifetime. Mine. Outright. With a note in the bequest that read, "For the care she has provided and continues to provide." I read that sentence 4 times. Gerald was watching me with the expression of a man who is prepared to wait. He said, "There's more." The second document was a promissory note, signed by my mother, dated 2018, for $47,000. The loan I had given her when Patrice's business failed and my mother co-signed a lease that collapsed. The money I had transferred in 3 installments over 4 months. The money my mother had told me in 2019 to consider a gift. She had not considered it a gift. My father had not considered it a gift. There was a promissory note, notarized with repayment terms, bearing my mother's signature in blue ink, sitting in a folder in my hands, filed with the estate. The third document was a letter. Not a legal document. Not formal stationery. Notebook paper in my father's handwriting. The big looping cursive he used when he was writing something he'd thought about for a long time. Gerald said, gently, that my father had left it with explicit instructions that it be given to me privately, at this meeting, not shared with the estate in general. I did not read it in the conference room. I folded it and put it in my coat pocket. I asked Gerald 4 questions about the probate process. He answered all 4. I thanked him. I shook his hand. I walked to my car. I sat in the parking garage for 22 minutes. I read the letter twice. The handwriting was careful. The sentences were short. Near the end, one line stopped me. He wrote, "I knew you would never ask for what you were owed, so I made sure you wouldn't have to." I put the letter back in my coat pocket. I drove to pick up my daughter from school. She ran to the car and told me she had gotten 100 on her spelling test, and I said, "I know you did." I drove us home. I made dinner. I helped her with her reading. At 10 o'clock, when the house was quiet, I sat at my kitchen table with the folder and read every page a third time. They came on a Saturday. It was mid-October by then, and the probate process had begun quietly, the way processes do when you have a good attorney and don't announce yourself. Patrice called me on a Wednesday to ask, casually, if I had heard anything from Gerald about Dad's stuff. I said I had an appointment pending. She said okay. Her voice had the particular quality of someone pretending to be casual, which sounds exactly like casual except that it is too evenly paced, like a song played slightly too slow. My mother arrived at my house at 11 on a Saturday morning with Patrice beside her and Marcus on the phone in Patrice's hand, held out in front of them like a shield or a weapon. I was not yet sure which. I let them in. I made coffee. I sat down. My mother looked around my house with the expression she uses when she is doing mental inventory. She looked at the furniture. She looked at the walls. I have a good house. I bought it myself 8 years ago with a down payment I had saved for 4 years, and I have made it into something. She has never said this. She has also never said the opposite. She simply catalogs. She said, "We need to talk about the house." She meant my father's house. The family home. "We know your father left some things a little complicated," Patrice said, leaning forward. "And we want to work together as a family to figure out how to handle everything fairly." Marcus said something from the phone that I didn't catch because Patrice was moving and the audio cut. "Fairly," I said. "He was confused toward the end," my mother said. "He wasn't thinking clearly. He would not have wanted the house to go to just one person." I looked at my mother for a long moment. She held my gaze with the confidence of someone who has not yet looked at the documents. "Who told Ellie she was going to be homeless?" I said. The room went quiet. Patrice looked at the table. My mother's expression shifted by about 4 degrees, not enough to be called a reaction, but enough for me to file it. "She's a child," my mother said. "She misunderstood something." What was there to misunderstand? She didn't answer that. I picked up my phone. I said, "I'm going to call Gerald. You'll want your own attorneys." If you've ever watched someone who couldn't manage a single phone call during a hospital stay suddenly find time to coordinate a Saturday morning real estate conversation, you already know where this is going. Stay with me. We're not done yet. If this is hitting somewhere familiar, drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll meet you on the other side of this. They did get attorneys. 2 of them, one shared between Patrice and my mother, one that Marcus found online and apparently retained over the phone in under 30 minutes. I know this because his attorney sent a letter within the week that had 3 factual errors in the opening paragraph, which I highlighted and forwarded to Gerald without comment. Gerald filed the estate paperwork. The will was clear. My father had been competent, documented, and specific. The 2009 will had been properly superseded. There was no ambiguity in the instrument. There was only the promissory note, which remained a separate matter. A debt owed to me, now part of the estate's accounting. My mother's attorney sent a letter calling the promissory note informal and unenforceable. I sent Gerald the notarization certificate, the bank transfer records from 2018, and the original note. 3 documents. I had them in a folder already. I had had them in a folder for 6 years because I am who I am. The attorney sent no follow-up letter. The pressure did not stop, though. It migrated. Phone calls that I documented. A voicemail from Marcus saying it wasn't about the money, which I transcribed and saved, not because I needed it, but because the timestamp would matter later, when he sent a text that was very much about the money. A conversation in which Patrice told me our father had always intended to leave things equally, which she said with such conviction that I almost asked her when exactly she had spoken to him about it. I didn't ask. I noted the date instead. They asked me to come to the house. The family home. The one that was now, as a matter of law, mine. They called it a family meeting. They said we should talk about what Dad would have wanted. They said they had been going through his things and wanted to do it together. I said yes. I brought a folder. It was a Sunday in November. The garden in the backyard had gone to seed the way it always did in fall. I noticed it when I pulled up. My father would have cut it back by now. Nobody had. The house was full. My mother sat in her chair, which she has sat in for 30 years. Patrice was at the kitchen table. Marcus and his wife were on the couch. A man I didn't recognize was introduced as Marcus's friend, which is a thing people sometimes do when they want a witness who can later say it was a friendly gathering. There was food. Patrice had made something and put it in the center of the table. I noticed that no one had made a plate. Everyone was waiting. My mother spoke first. She always does. She said that my father had been a wonderful man who loved all of his children equally. She said that he had not been himself in his final years, and that the decisions he made toward the end were not what he would have chosen with a clear head. She said that a good daughter, she said it like that, a good daughter would not use legal mechanisms to take from her family. She said that she had given 40 years to this house and that it was her home. Patrice nodded throughout. Marcus's wife stared at the table. When my mother finished, she looked at me with the expression I have seen my entire life. The expression that has always meant, the right response is silence and compliance. I said, "May I say something?" Patrice said, "Of course." She said it quickly, which told me she expected me to apologize. I opened the folder. I said, "This is the will. Dated March 11th. I have the notarization, the filing record, and the legal opinion from 2 independent estate attorneys confirming its validity." I placed it in the center of the table. This is the promissory note for $47,000, signed by Mom, notarized October 4, 2018. I placed it beside the first document. This is the transfer record from my account in 3 installments. March, June, and September 2018. Another page. This is a letter from Gerald's office confirming that the note has been recorded as a debt against the estate. The room was quiet. Dad wasn't confused, I said. He updated this will 14 months before he died. He met with Gerald 3 times. He had a cognitive assessment on file because Gerald required it. He knew what he was signing. My mother said, "You can't do this." "The document does it," I said. "I'm just reading it." Marcus said something from across the room louder than necessary, about how family doesn't do this to family. His voice had the register of someone who had been building up to the sentence for several days. I let him finish. I did not respond to it directly because it was not a question and it did not contain a fact I needed to address. Patrice said, quieter, "Do you know what she told Ellie? Do you know what this is doing to her?" I said, "I know exactly what was said to Ellie. September 29th, approximately 7:45 p.m., in this kitchen." I looked at my mother. She told an 8-year-old that she was going to be homeless, before the will had even been read, before there was any legal proceeding, before there was anything to know. I paused. "How did you know what was in the will, Mom?" The room was very still. My mother looked at Patrice. A look so brief that Marcus's wife probably didn't catch it. Caught it. I noted it. The answer would come out later in discovery, when it came out that my father had mentioned to Patrice, once quietly, that he had changed things. And Patrice had told my mother. And my mother had gone to my daughter in a kitchen while I was in the bathroom. I reached into the folder one more time. I placed the letter on the table. My father's handwriting. Notebook paper. I did not read all of it. I read one line. "I knew you would never ask for what you were owed, so I made sure you wouldn't have to." The room was silent for a long time. Marcus's friend, the witness who was supposed to see a friendly gathering, was looking at the window. Patrice had her hand over her mouth. She had loved my father. I believe that. I held it where it was, noted, but not exchangeable for what had been done. My mother looked at the letter for a long time. Then she looked at me. I picked up the folder. I said, The house transfers in 30 days. Gerald will be in touch about the note. I zipped my coat. I'll let myself out. At the door I stopped. I did not turn around. I said. She asked me if it was true. I told her no. That's the only thing in this room that was done right. I walked to my car. I sat for a moment. The garden was visible from the driveway. Overgrown and quiet. I took a photograph of it with my phone. I don't know why. I still have it. The house transferred on December 19th. I was at Gerald's office at 9 a.m. with a folder I had organized the night before. The paperwork took 40 minutes. Gerald shook my hand twice, which I noted as unusual for him. The market assessment came back at $387,000. The promissory note of $47,000, plus 11 years of simple interest at the rate specified in the document, a detail my mother's attorney had not read carefully enough, settled at $61,400. That amount was deducted from the estate before any distribution. My mother received her share of my father's remaining accounts, reduced accordingly. She called me once after the transfer. She said, "I hope you're happy." I said, "I hope Ellie gets an apology." She hung up. The apology has not come. I have not called back. Marcus has gone quiet in the way of people who have recalculated and found the math unfavorable. Patrice sent me a text in January that said she was sorry for her part, and that she missed me. I read it 3 times. I have not yet responded. I will. I'm still deciding what is true. The conscience in the room on that Sunday in November was Marcus's wife Carol, who found me in the hallway before I left and said very quietly, "Your father was right." She said nothing else. She went back to the living room. It was not absolution for what her husband did or didn't do, but I noted it. Cost her something probably to say it. I didn't forget. My father's letter lives in my fireproof box now, in a plastic sleeve, beside the deed to the property. I have read it many times. The line about not asking for what I was owed, I have thought about it at odd hours on highways and grocery stores in the 5 minutes before my alarm goes off. He saw something I had stopped seeing. He wrote it down so that I would have to read it eventually. I sold the family home in February. Not for spite. Because I live in my own house and 2 mortgages is not a strategy, and because I know that objects are not people. The family home is not my father. My father is in the letter in the fireproof box. He is in my daughter's laugh, which is his laugh, the same wide unguarded thing. The sale price was $391,000. I used the proceeds to establish an education trust for Ellie, fully funded, named quietly for my father, Leon Aubrey Whitfield, in the beneficiary documents that only I and the trust attorney have seen. He paid off his house. I paid off her future. The math is right. I also did one other thing. My father's garden. I had it photographed properly before the sale, every bed, every corner, and I had the photographs printed large and framed. One hangs in Ellie's room. She asks about it sometimes. I tell her about the talking. How he'd walk the rows in the morning and tell the tomatoes they were doing a good job. She finds this funny, and then she finds it sweet in the way children can hold 2 things at once without effort. The other print hangs in my office, next to my monitor. I look at it when the numbers get complicated. It doesn't do anything. It just reminds me what careful, patient work looks like when it's done with love instead of fear. There is a kind of labor that families extract without asking because the person doing it never refuses. They call it love. They call it what family does. They count on the quiet people to keep absorbing because the quiet people always have. What they do not understand, what my mother did not understand, what none of them understood, is that quiet is not the same as empty. Quiet is where the documentation lives. If you watched a woman take a folder into a room where her family expected her to apologize and leave with what belonged to her instead, and if any piece of that felt familiar, you already know what this channel is for. Drop a comment. Tell me what you kept. Tell me what you finally stopped caring. Subscribe because we're not done here. There are more of us than they think. And we keep the receipts.